Zexai stepped off the transport ship and felt the strange gravity of Kepler 442b pull at his long limbs. The air tasted different here, thick with moisture and something else he could not name. His blue skin rippled with nervous patterns as he looked around the landing pad. Everything about this human world seemed wrong to his careful mind. The research station stretched before him like a metal growth on the planet's surface. Steam rose from vents in the ground, and purple lightning danced across the sky even though no storm clouds were visible. His homeworld never had such wild weather. The Valkyrians had learned long ago to build their cities in safe places where nature could not hurt them. A human approached him, walking with quick steps that seemed too fast for safety. The man had short brown hair and wore a uniform with many pockets. His skin was darker than most humans Zexai had seen in the data files, and his eyes held a brightness that made the alien feel uncomfortable. "You must be our Valkyrian friend," the human said, extending his hand in the strange human greeting ritual. "I'm Commander Jake Morrison. Welcome to our little corner of the galaxy." Zexai touched the human's hand briefly, noting how warm and rough it felt compared to his own smooth skin. "I am Research Observer Zexai of the 3rd Valkyrian Science Council. I am here to study your cultural patterns for 6 standard months." Jake laughed, a sound that seemed too loud for the serious nature of their meeting. "Cultural patterns. Well, you picked an interesting place to study us. Come on, let me show you around before the evening storm hits." They walked toward the main building while Jake pointed out different areas of the station. Zexai noticed that many of the structures looked damaged and repaired multiple times. Scorch marks covered several walls, and metal patches covered holes in what should have been solid surfaces. "Do you experience frequent attacks?" Zexai asked, pulling out his recording device to document the damage. "Attacks? Not exactly," Jake said, ducking as a piece of metal flew overhead in the wind. "This planet just likes to remind us who's really in charge. Last week we had acid rain that ate through the roof of Building 3. Month before that, the ground opened up and tried to swallow our power generator." Zexai stopped walking and stared at the human. "Your species chooses to live in such dangerous conditions voluntarily." "Dangerous. I guess it is when you put it that way," Jake said, not seeming worried at all. "But the research opportunities here are amazing. Dr. Chang has discovered 3 new forms of life just this year. And Danny, our engineer, he's figured out how to use the planet's electrical storms to boost our power systems." They entered the main building through doors that sealed shut with a loud hiss behind them. The interior was surprisingly clean and organized, though Zexai could hear strange humming sounds coming from the walls. Several humans worked at stations covered with screens and blinking lights. A woman with long black hair and quick movements looked up from her work and smiled at them. She wore a white coat covered in stains that might have been food or chemicals. "This must be our observer," she said, walking over with the same 2 quick steps all humans seem to use. "Dr. Lisa Chang," she said, offering her hand. "I run the biology department here. I hope you're ready for some excitement." Before Zexai could ask what she meant by excitement, alarms began ringing throughout the building. Red lights flashed on every wall, and humans started moving even faster than before. Several of them ran toward the exits while others gathered around computer screens. "What is the nature of this emergency?" Zexai asked, his skin pattern shifting to deep purple with concern. "Emergency? This isn't an emergency," Jake said, checking a device on his wrist. "Just a Class 4 earthquake with some volcanic activity. Pretty normal for this time of day." A young human with grease on his hands and a wide smile ran up to them. "Commander, the new stabilizers are working great." "We barely felt that one. Good work, Danny," Jake said. "Zexai, meet Danny Rodriguez, our chief engineer, and the reason we're all still alive." Danny wiped his hand on his shirt before offering. "It's Zexai. Nice to meet you. Hope you like adventure because this place never gets boring." The building shook again, and Zexai grabbed onto a nearby wall for support. The humans around him continued their work as if nothing was happening. Dr. Chang went back to her screens. Jake started reading reports, and Danny disappeared into what looked like a maintenance tunnel. "Do events like this occur frequently?" Zexai asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Oh, every few hours," Lisa said without looking up from her work. "The seismic activity follows a pretty regular pattern. We've learned to work around it. Zexai pulled out his recording device again and began making notes. In his 600 years of life, he had never seen any species voluntarily live in such conditions. The Valkyrians would have moved their research to a safer location or abandoned the project entirely, yet these humans seemed almost happy about their dangerous situation. They joked about acid rain and earthquakes. They built their equipment to handle volcanic activity and electrical storms. They treated deadly natural disasters like minor inconveniences. As night fell over the station and the promised storm began hammering the buildings with rain that glowed faintly green, Zexai sat in his assigned quarters and began his first report to the Valkyrian High Command. Subject species displays concerning lack of survival instinct, he typed into his communication device. Humans appear to seek out dangerous situations rather than avoid them. Further study required to understand this apparently self-destructive behavior. Outside his window, lightning struck the station's power collectors, and the lights briefly grew brighter instead of going out. In the distance, he could hear Jake Morrison laughing about something while Danny Rodriguez sang an old human song about storms. Zex single quotes HAI, looked at his notes again and added one more line. Despite apparent recklessness, subjects show remarkable adaptation to hostile environment. Will continue observation. 3 weeks had passed since Zexai arrived at the research station, and he was beginning to understand the daily rhythm of human life on Kepler 442b. Morning brought acid fog that required protective suits for outside work. Afternoon delivered the regular earthquakes that made the buildings dance. Evening storms provided both danger and power for their systems. The humans had learned to live with all of it. Zexai was in the main laboratory with Dr. Chang when the long-range sensors began screaming their warning. The sound was different from the usual alarms, higher and more urgent. Every screen in the room turned red, and data began flowing across them faster than his eyes could follow. Lisa stopped her work on a sample of local plant life and moved to the sensor station. Her face went pale as she read the information. "Jake," she called out, her voice carrying none of its usual cheerfulness. "You need to see this right now." Commander Morrison appeared within minutes, followed by Danny and several other crew members. They gathered around the main display screen as Lisa brought up the sensor data. Zexai watched from nearby, his skin patterns shifting to curious. "Yellow, long-range sensors picked up the signature about an hour ago," Lisa said, pointing to markers on the star chart. 13 ships, massive energy readings, and they're heading straight for this system. Jake studied the display with serious eyes. "How long until they get here?" "At their current speed, maybe 4 days," Danny said, running calculations on his portable device. "But Jake, look at these energy readings. These aren't normal ships." Zexai moved closer to see the data better. The numbers on the screen made his blood run cold. Those energy signatures were unmistakable to anyone who had studied galactic history. "Those are devourer ships," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The room went completely silent. Every human turned to look at him, and Zexai saw something in their eyes he had never seen before. For the first time since he arrived, the humans looked afraid. "Are you certain?" Jake asked. Zexai nodded, his skin now deep blue with worry. "My people have studied devourer technology for centuries. Those readings match their ships exactly. 13 vessels means they plan to strip this entire world of all useful materials." Lisa sat down heavily in her chair. "Strip the world. You mean they're going to destroy everything?" "Everything," Zexai confirmed. "They consume planets completely. When they finish, nothing remains but empty space and cosmic dust." Danny was already working at his computer terminal. "I need to send a message to Valkyrian Command," he said. "They'll want to evacuate their observer immediately." Before Zexai could respond, his communication device activated itself. A message from the Valkyrian High Command appeared on the screen, written in the formal language used for emergency situations. "Research Observer Zexai," the message began. "We have detected devourer presence in your current system. Emergency evacuation transport departs from nearest starbase in 18 hours. Report to evacuation point immediately." "This is not a request." Zexai stared at the message for a long moment. Standard Valkyrian protocol was clear when it came to devourers. "Run immediately. Do not attempt resistance." Do not risk Valkyrian lives for any reason. His people had survived for thousands of years by following these rules. Well, Jake said, breaking the silence, I guess that settles it. We'll help you. Get to the evacuation point. What about you? Zexai asked. Jake looked around at his crew, and Zexai saw something pass between them. Some kind of silent communication that humans seem to share in moments of crisis. We're staying, Lisa said firmly. Staying, Zexai repeated, certain he had misunderstood. You cannot stay. The Devourers will kill everyone on this planet. Maybe, Danny said, already pulling up building schematics on his screen. But we've got 4 days to figure out how to fight them. Zexai felt his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. Fight them. No species has ever successfully fought the Devourers. They have destroyed thousands of worlds across the galaxy. The mathematical probability of successful resistance is essentially zero. Essentially zero isn't actually zero, Jake said calmly. And someone has to try eventually. If everyone keeps running away, sooner or later there won't be anywhere left to run to. But your research, Zexai said, looking at Lisa, you have made important discoveries here. You could continue your work on another world. Lisa shook her head. The bioadaptive technology we've developed here could help every species in the galaxy. If the Devourers destroy this station, that research dies with us. But if we can somehow survive and share what we've learned, millions of lives could be saved. The odds are impossible, Zexai said again, unable to understand their logic. Yeah, probably, Danny agreed, but he kept working on his schematics. But impossible just means no one's figured out how to do it yet. Jake called a meeting of the entire station crew. 12 humans gathered in the main conference room while Zexai watched from the doorway. Jake explained the situation clearly and honestly. He told them about the Devourers, about the evacuation orders, and about the choice they all faced. Anyone who wants to leave can take the next supply transport, Jake said. No questions asked, no judgment from anyone. This isn't a military unit, and I can't order you to stay. One by one, the crew members spoke up. Alex Turner, the communications specialist, said he was staying to help coordinate defenses. Maria Santos, who managed the station's food systems, said someone needed to keep everyone fed during the fighting. Kyle Barnes, the youngest member of the crew, said he wasn't going to run when his friends were staying to fight. Each person gave their own reasons, but they all came to the same conclusion. They were staying. ZEX single quotes HAI watched this process with growing confusion. These humans knew they were going to die. The mathematical models were clear. 12 humans with basic research equipment could not defeat 13 Devourer ships with technology. Advanced beyond anything in the known galaxy. Yet they voted to stay anyway. After the meeting, Zexai found Jake standing alone in the observation deck, looking out at the storm clouds gathering for the evening's electrical display. I do not understand your decision, Zexai said. Your species is not naturally suited for combat. You have no military weapons, no battle experience, no support from other ships. Why do you choose certain death? Jake was quiet for a long time before answering. My grandfather used to tell me stories about Earth's old wars, he said finally. There were times when small groups of people had to stand against impossible odds. Most of them died, but they bought time for others to escape or prepare defenses. So you sacrifice yourselves for others, maybe, Jake said. Or maybe we're just too stubborn to give up without trying. Either way, someone has to make the stand, might as well be us. Zexai looked out at the approaching storm and felt something he had never experienced before. His logical mind told him to leave immediately, to follow his orders and return to safety. But something else, something deeper, made him want to stay and see what would happen when humans faced impossible odds. For the first time in his life, Zexai began to understand that mathematics could not explain everything about intelligent behavior. The evacuation transport would arrive in 6 hours. Zexai had packed his research materials and prepared his final reports for the Valkyrian High Command. Everything was ready for his departure, yet he found himself unable to leave his quarters. Through his window, he could see the humans working frantically to prepare their defenses. Danny Rodriguez had spent the entire night converting mining equipment into weapons. Lisa Chung was uploading all her research data to transmission arrays that would broadcast their discoveries across the galaxy if the station was destroyed. Jake Morrison coordinated everything with the calm efficiency of someone who had accepted his fate. HFY activated his communication device and began composing a message to his superiors. Research observer HFY requesting extended assignment. Duration, he typed. Additional study time required to complete cultural analysis. His finger hovered over the send button. This message was a lie? He was not staying for research purposes. The truth was something he could barely admit to himself. He was staying because the idea of leaving these humans to face the devourers alone made him feel sick. Before he could change his mind, he pressed send. The response came back within minutes. Request denied. Emergency evacuation mandatory. Transport departs in 5 hours 40 minutes. Comply immediately. HFY stared at the message for a long time. His people had clear rules about following orders. Valkyrians did not disobey their superiors. They did not take unnecessary risks. They survived through careful planning and logical decision-making. He deleted the message without responding. 2 hours later, Danny found him in the main laboratory, studying the weapon modifications the engineer had designed. Thought you'd be heading to the transport by now, Danny said, wiping grease from his hands. I have decided to extend my research period, HFY said, not looking up from the technical drawings. Danny grinned. Research, huh? Well, I guess you'll get to see some pretty interesting human behavior over the next few days. I do not understand. These modifications, HFY said, pointing to the weapon schematics. Your mining lasers were never designed for combat applications. They weren't designed for combat, but they'll work anyway, Danny explained, pulling up a chair next to the alien. See, the basic principle is the same. A laser powerful enough to cut through rock can also cut through ship armor. We just need to boost the power output and modify the focusing array. But the power requirements will be enormous, HFY observed. Your station's generators cannot provide sufficient energy for sustained combat. That's where the planet helps us out, Danny said, pointing to another set of drawings. Those electrical storms that hit us every evening, they're incredibly powerful. I've figured out how to store that energy in our backup systems and release it all at once when we need it. HFY studied the plans more carefully. The engineering was crude compared to Valkyrian technology, but it was also clever in ways he had not expected. This design should not work according to conventional power management theory. Conventional theory doesn't account for human stubbornness, Danny said with a laugh. Sometimes the impossible becomes possible when you really need it to. That evening, as the regular storm began building overhead, HFY joined the humans for their communal meal. This was another behavior he found difficult to understand. Faced with certain death in less than 2 days, they gathered together to share food and conversation as if nothing had changed. So what's it like on your home world? Asked Maria Santos, passing him a plate of food that smelled strange but not unpleasant. Valkyris is very different from this place, HFY said, trying to find simple words to describe his planet. We have large cities built in safe locations. The weather is controlled and predictable. Natural disasters are prevented through careful environmental management. Sounds peaceful, said Alex Turner. It is peaceful, HFY agreed. My people have not experienced war or natural catastrophe for over 3,000 years. Must be nice not having to worry about your roof getting eaten by acid rain, Kyle Barnes said, making several humans laugh. But doesn't it get boring? Lisa asked. I mean, if everything is safe and predictable all the time. HFY considered the question. Valkyrians value stability and order. We do not seek excitement or danger. Yet here you are, Jake observed. Quietly. After the meal, HFY found himself alone with Lisa in her laboratory. She was working late, preparing final backup copies of all her research data. Her hands moved quickly across the computer controls, but he noticed they were shaking slightly. Dr. Chang, he said carefully, may I ask you a question? Sure, she said without looking up from her work. Are you afraid? Lisa's hands stopped moving. She sat back in her chair and looked at him directly. Terrified, she said simply. This answer surprised him. But you show no signs of fear during the day. You work normally, you joke with the others, you make plans as if survival is possible. Fear doesn't mean you stop functioning, Lisa explained. It just means you have to work harder to keep going. I'm scared that I'm going to die in 2 days. I'm scared that my research will be lost. I'm scared that the Devourers will keep destroying worlds and no one will ever find a way to stop them. Then why do you stay? Zexhai asked. Your escape transport has not departed yet. Lisa was quiet for several minutes, focusing on her computer screen. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady, because running away won't make the fear go away. The Devourers will still be out there, destroying other worlds, killing other people. At least if I stay and fight, I'm doing something about the thing that scares me, even though you will likely die. Even though I will likely die, she confirmed. Courage isn't about not being afraid, Zexhai. Courage is being afraid and doing what needs to be done anyway. That night, Zexhai lay in his bed listening to the sounds of the storm outside and the humans working throughout the station. For the first time in his 600 years of life, he could not sleep. His mind kept running calculations, trying to find some way the humans could survive the coming battle. Every mathematical model showed the same result. The Devourers would destroy the station within hours of their arrival. The humans would fight bravely, but bravery could not overcome such overwhelming technological superiority, yet something about their determination made him want to believe that mathematics might be wrong. These humans had survived on a planet that should have killed them dozens of times over. They had built a research station in conditions that most species would consider impossible. They had created weapons from mining equipment and learned to use lightning storms as a power source. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to do one more impossible thing. As dawn approached, Zexhai made his decision. He activated his communication device and sent the final message to the Valkyrian High Command. I have chosen to remain with the humans during the Devourer attack. This decision is my own and does not reflect Valkyrian policy. If I survive, I will transmit a complete report on human combat behavior. If I do not survive, please record that. I learned what it means to stand with beings who choose courage over safety. He sent the message and then turned off his communication device. Whatever happened next, he would face it alongside the humans who had taught him that some things were more important than survival. The Devourers arrived exactly when the sensors predicted they would. 13 massive ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the star system and began their methodical approach toward Kepler 442b. Each ship was the size of a small moon, dark metal constructs that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Zexhai stood in the command center with the human crew, watching the enemy fleet on the main display screen. His skin had turned a deep purple color that indicated extreme fear, and no amount of conscious control could change it back to normal. Every instinct his species had developed over millions of years was screaming at him to run, to hide, to do anything except stand and fight these ancient destroyers. They're not in any hurry, Jake observed, studying the tactical display. Looks like they'll reach us in about 6 hours. Standard Devourer approach pattern, Danny said, checking his weapon systems one final time. They like to take their time, scan everything, make sure they don't miss any useful materials. Lisa was at her station, monitoring the final data uploads to distant human colonies. All research files transmitted successfully, she reported. Whatever happens here, the information will survive. Zexhai tried to speak but found his voice would not work properly. The fear was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was not just concern about personal safety. It was a deep, primitive terror that seemed to reach into his bones and squeeze his heart until he could barely breathe. You okay there, friend? Alex asked, noticing the alien's distress. I am experiencing fear, Zexhai managed to say. My species does not have natural responses to combat situations. This sensation is very difficult to manage. Yeah, fear's a tough one, Jake said sympathetically, but you don't have to manage it. You just have to keep working despite it. How do you function while experiencing such intense emotion? Zexhai asked. Practice, Maria said from her position at the supply station. Humans have been scared of things for our entire evolutionary history. We've learned to work around it. The first Devourer probes reached the planet's atmosphere 3 hours before the main fleet arrived. Small, fast ships that scanned the surface and transmitted data back to the larger vessels. The station's sensors tracked them as they circled the research facility repeatedly. They know we're here, Danny reported. Looks like they're trying to figure out if we're worth bothering with? We're about to show them we're definitely worth bothering with, Jake said grimly when the main fleet entered orbit around Kepler 442b. Zexhai got his first close look at Devourer technology. The ships were covered in strange geometric patterns that seemed to shift and move when he looked at them directly. Weapon ports opened along their hulls like hungry mouths, and mechanical appendages extended toward the planet's surface to begin the harvesting process. They're starting atmospheric stripping, Lisa announced, reading her instruments. Standard procedure is to remove all useful gases before landing ground forces. How long before they reach the station? Jake asked. At current rate, maybe 2 hours, Danny calculated. But they'll probably send attack ships to clear us out first. As if responding to his words, dozens of smaller craft separated from the main Devourer fleet and began descending toward the planet. Each one was still larger than anything the humans had ever built, armed with weapons that could level mountains. Here they come, Alex said. His voice steady despite the impossible odds they faced. Jake activated the station's defense systems. Modified mining lasers emerged from hidden positions around the complex, powered by the massive energy storage banks Danny had built from the planet's lightning storms. Shield generators that had once protected against acid rain and volcanic ash now prepared to face weapons that could crack planets. All stations report ready, Kyle announced from his position at the communications array. Weapons charged and tracking targets, Danny confirmed. Shields at maximum power, Maria added. Zexhai found himself assigned to the sensor station, monitoring the approaching enemy ships and relaying targeting information to the weapon systems. His hands shook as he worked the controls, but the familiar routine of operating technology helped him focus despite his terror. The first wave of Devourer ships opened fire while still several kilometers away. Beams of energy that glowed with unnatural colors struck the station's shields with tremendous force. The entire structure shook and warning alarms began sounding throughout the command center. Shields holding at 70%, Maria reported. Returning. Fire, Danny announced. The modified mining lasers struck back with surprising effectiveness. The concentrated beams, powered by stored lightning and focused through hastily built targeting systems, punched through the armor of the nearest Devourer ship and caused massive explosions inside its hull. Direct hit, Zexhai called out, amazement overriding his fear for a moment. Enemy vessel severely damaged. 1 down, only about 1 million to go, Alex said with forced humor, but their success was brief. More Devourer ships descended from orbit, and their return fire was devastating. The station's shields failed completely within the first hour of combat, and secondary explosions began tearing through the outer buildings. We've lost the eastern wing, Kyle reported, his voice tight with pain. Alex and Maria were in that section. Zexhai watched on his sensors as the human life signs in the destroyed area disappeared. Alex Turner and Maria Santos, who had shared their evening meal with him just the day before, were dead. The reality of death in combat hit him like a physical blow. This was not theoretical anymore. The Devourers were killing his friends, and they would kill him too unless somehow the impossible happened. Switching to backup power, Danny announced, though Zexhai could see blood running down the engineer's arm from a piece of flying debris. Weapons still operational, Jake confirmed, though the command center was now filled with smoke and the smell of burning circuits. Another wave of enemy fire struck the station, and this time the entire building tilted as its foundation cracked. Emergency lights flickered on as the main power systems failed, casting everything in an eerie red glow. Structural integrity failing, Lisa reported from her damaged workstation. We can't take much more of this. Zexhai looked around at the remaining humans and saw something that amazed him. They were all afraid. He could see it in their faces, hear it in their voices, smell it in the air around them. Jake's hands were shaking as he gave orders. Lisa's voice cracked when she spoke. Danny kept wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cold air rushing in through the damaged walls. They were terrified, just like he was, but they kept working anyway. Kyle Barnes, barely old enough to be considered an adult by human standards, stayed at his post even as pieces of the ceiling fell around him. Lisa continued uploading research data even though her computer terminal was sparking and smoking. Danny kept the weapons firing even with blood streaming from multiple wounds. For the first time in his life, Zexai understood what courage really meant. It was not the absence of fear. It was the decision to act despite being more afraid than you had ever been in your life. When the next wave of Devourer ships began their attack run, Zexai was no longer thinking about survival probabilities or mathematical models. He was thinking about Alex Turner's jokes and Maria Santus's kindness and the way these humans had accepted him as part of their family. He was thinking about standing with people who had taught him that some things were worth being afraid for. The battle had been raging for 3 hours when Zexai made his choice. Another explosion rocked the command center, throwing him against his workstation hard enough to crack 2 of his ribs. Emergency alarms wailed constantly now, and smoke filled the air so thickly that breathing had become difficult. "We need someone to manually target the Western laser array," Danny shouted over the noise, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. "The targeting computer is completely fried." "I'll go," Kyle volunteered, but Jake shook his head. "You're needed here on communications," the commander said. "I'll handle it." "No," Zexai said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "I will go." Everyone in the command center turned to look at him. His blue skin was still deep purple with fear, and his hands were shaking, but his eyes were steady. "Zexai, you don't have any training with our weapons?" Lisa said gently. "Then teach me quickly," he replied. Danny pulled up the control schematics on a portable device. "It's not too complicated," he said, showing Zexai the basic operation procedures. "Point the targeting reticle at the enemy ship, lock on when the system beeps, and fire when you have a clear shot. The laser array is in the western tower," Jake added. "You'll be completely exposed up there. If the Devourers target that position directly—" "I understand the risks," Zexai said, taking the control device from Danny. "But someone must operate the weapon, and you are all needed for other tasks." As he prepared to leave the command center, Lisa grabbed his arm. "Zexai, why are you doing this? This isn't your fight. Your people have never been involved in conflicts like this." Zexai looked around at the damaged room, at the humans who had become his friends, at the displays showing more Devourer ships approaching from orbit. 3 weeks ago, I thought courage was something humans possessed that my people lacked," he said slowly, "but I was wrong. Courage is not something you possess. It is something you choose." He made his way through corridors filled with debris and emergency lighting to reach the western tower. The laser array was located on an exposed platform that offered an excellent view of the approaching enemy ships and no protection whatsoever from their weapons. The targeting system was simpler than Danny had described, but more terrifying than Zexai had imagined. Through the targeting scope, he could see individual Devourer ships in perfect detail. They were massive constructs of dark metal and pulsing energy, covered in weapon ports that glowed with malevolent light. His first shot missed completely, the laser beam disappearing harmlessly into space. His second shot grazed the side of an enemy vessel but caused no visible damage. By his third attempt, he was beginning to understand the rhythm of the targeting system. The fourth shot struck a Devourer ship directly in what appeared to be its main engine assembly. The explosion was magnificent and terrible, lighting up the sky with colors that had no names. The ship spiraled out of control and crashed into the planet's surface several kilometers away. "Outstanding shooting," Jake's voice crackled through the communication system. "Keep it up." But Zexai's success had attracted attention from the enemy fleet. Several Devourer ships began concentrating their fire on the western tower, and the platform shook violently with each impact. Pieces of metal and concrete fell around him as he struggled to maintain his position at the targeting controls. Through his communication device, he could hear the voices of his human friends as they fought their own battles throughout the station. Kyle was coordinating defensive positions while under heavy fire. Lisa was attempting to complete critical research uploads while her laboratory collapsed around her. Danny was performing emergency repairs on weapon systems that should have been impossible to fix. Each of them was afraid. Each of them was facing almost certain death, and each of them kept working anyway. Zexai fired again, and another Devourer ship exploded in a ball of twisted metal and escaping atmosphere. But the return fire was becoming more intense, and he knew the western tower could not survive much longer. "Zexai?" Danny's voice came through the communication system, urgent but controlled. I've been studying the Devourer ship configurations, and I think there might be a way to stop them all at once. Explain, HFY said, ducking as another energy beam passed just overhead. Their ships are all connected through some kind of network link, Danny continued. If we could overload that network with enough feedback, it might disable their entire fleet. How do we create such feedback? HFY asked. We'd need to channel all our remaining power through the main laser array and target their command ship, Danny explained. But that would mean overloading our own fusion reactor. The explosion would destroy the entire station, HFY understood immediately. They could defeat the Devourer fleet, but only by sacrificing themselves in the process. How long do you need to prepare this overload? He asked. Maybe 20 minutes, Danny said. But we'd have to hold our positions until then, and the Devourers are closing in fast. Through his targeting scope, HFY could see that Danny was right. More enemy ships were descending from the main fleet, and their firepower was overwhelming the station's remaining defenses. The eastern and southern sections of the complex were already completely destroyed. Commander Morrison, HFY said into his communication device, I request permission to address the entire crew. Go ahead, Jake replied. HFY took a deep breath, trying to find words that could express what he needed to say. My friends, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the station's communication system. 3 weeks ago, I came here to study human behavior. I thought I was observing a species that lacked proper survival instincts. Another explosion shook the tower, but he continued speaking. I was wrong. You do not lack survival instincts. You simply understand that some things are more important than survival. You understand that courage is not about being unafraid. It is about being afraid and choosing to act anyway. He paused to fire at another approaching Devourer ship, scoring a direct hit that sent it spinning into the planet's atmosphere. My people have always believed that the logical response to impossible odds is retreat, he continued. But you have taught me that logic cannot explain everything about intelligent behavior. Sometimes the right choice is to stand and fight, even when you know you cannot win. HFY, Lisa's voice came through the system, soft but clear. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying that I choose to stand with you, he replied. I choose to fight alongside beings who have shown me what it means to be truly brave. And if we must die to stop these destroyers, then we will die together. One by one, the remaining crew members voiced their agreement. Kyle Barnes, who should have been running for safety, but instead stayed to coordinate their defense. Lisa Chang, who could have escaped with her research but chose to see the mission through to its conclusion. Danny Rodriguez, who had already done the impossible by creating weapons from mining equipment and was now preparing to do something even more impossible. And Jake Morrison, who had never asked them to stay but had never asked them to leave either. Because he understood that some decisions could only be made by each person for themselves. As the fusion reactor began building toward critical overload, and the final wave of Devourer ships approached the station, HFY realized that he was no longer afraid. The terror was still there, but it had been joined by something stronger: pride, joy, the absolute certainty that he was exactly where he belonged, doing exactly what needed to be done. For the first time in his life, HFY understood what it meant to choose courage over safety, purpose over survival, and love over logic. The fusion reactor reached critical overload at exactly the moment the Devourer command ship moved into optimal firing position. Danny Rodriguez had timed everything perfectly, channeling 3 weeks' worth of stored lightning energy through systems that were never designed to handle such massive power loads. HFY stood at his targeting station in the western tower, his hands steady on the controls despite the fact that the entire structure was shaking itself apart around him. Through his communication device, he could hear his human friends at their own positions throughout the dying station. Reactor at 110% of safe levels, Danny reported, his voice calm despite the circumstances. All power. Routing to main laser array. Target acquired, HFY announced, centering his targeting reticle on the largest Devourer ship. The command vessel was a massive construct that dwarfed even the other ships in the fleet, covered in the strange geometric patterns that seemed to pulse with their own dark energy. All stations report ready, Jake said from the command center. Lisa, Kyle's voice came through the system. Your research uploads are complete. Everything you discovered here will survive. Thank you, Lisa replied simply. Zexai felt a strange peace settle over him as he prepared to fire the final shot. The terror that had gripped him for days was still there, but it no longer controlled him. He had learned what the humans knew instinctively, that fear was not something to be eliminated but something to be used as fuel for action. Firing in 10 seconds, he announced. Through the communication system, he heard Jake Morrison speak one last time to his crew. "It has been an honor serving with all of you," the commander said. "Whatever happens next, remember that we chose to stand when others would run. We chose to fight when others would hide. We chose to give our lives so others might live." 5 seconds, Zexai called out. "See you on the other side," Danny said with a laugh that somehow managed to sound genuinely happy. "Fire," Jake ordered. Zexai pressed the firing control, and every system on the station released its power at once. The modified mining laser, boosted by fusion energy and stored lightning, struck the Devourer command ship with a beam of light that could be seen from orbit. The targeting feedback created by the impact traveled through the enemy fleet's network connections, overloading systems that had functioned perfectly for millions of years. One by one, the Devourer ships began exploding as their own power systems turned against them. The massive vessels that had seemed invincible moments before became brilliant flowers of destructive energy blooming against the darkness of space. The research station's fusion reactor reached critical mass 3 seconds after Zexai fired. The explosion vaporized everything within a 50-kilometer radius and sent a shockwave through local space that would be detected by listening posts throughout the galaxy. Zexai's last thought before the light consumed him was wonder at how peaceful he felt. He had found his courage, and he had used it alongside beings who had taught him what it meant to be truly alive. 6 months later, a Valkyrian science vessel arrived in the Kepler 442 system to investigate the massive energy readings that had been detected throughout the galaxy. They found nothing but debris and radiation where the Devourer fleet had been destroyed, and a small crater where the human research station had stood, but they also found something else. Zexai's final transmission was still broadcasting from an emergency beacon that had somehow survived the explosion. The message spread through the galactic communication network faster than any news had ever traveled before. When the next Devourer fleet appeared at the edge of the Centauri system, 3 months later they did not find the usual pattern of fleeing refugees and abandoned worlds. Instead, they faced a coordinated defense force made up of ships from dozens of different species. Humans fought alongside Valkyrians, who fought alongside Zephyrians, Corvan, Deltans, and representatives of every major civilization in local space. The Devourers had never faced organized resistance before. They had relied on fear and the natural survival instincts of other species to clear their path through the galaxy. But Zexai's message had carried more than just information about human courage. It had carried the proof that courage could be learned, that fear could be overcome, and that standing together was stronger than running alone. The battle at Centauri lasted 3 days and cost thousands of lives, but when it was over, the Devourer fleet was destroyed. For the first time in galactic history, an entire system had been successfully defended against the ancient destroyers. The memorial station built in orbit around Kepler 442b became a gathering place for beings from across the galaxy who wanted to understand what had happened there. The central monument was simple, a metal sculpture that showed figures from different species standing together against a dark sky. The inscription was written in dozens of languages, but the message was the same in all of them. They stood when others would run, they fought when others would hide. They died so others might live. This is the day we learned what it means to be truly alive. Zekmar, who had been Zexai's mentor in the Valkyrian Science Council, often brought groups of young researchers to the memorial. He would tell them the story of his student who had traveled to a human research station to study cultural patterns and had instead discovered the meaning of courage. Zexai found his bravery not because he stopped being afraid, Zekmar would explain to each new group of students. He found it because he learned that some things are worth being afraid for. When you stand with humans, you learn that courage is not the absence of fear, it is the mastery of it. The students would ask questions about the mathematical probability. of the human success, about the logic of their decision to fight, about the scientific basis for their apparent fearlessness. Zekmar would answer each question carefully, but he always ended with the same observation. Mathematics cannot explain everything about intelligent behavior, he would say. Sometimes the most important decisions cannot be reduced to calculations and probability models. Sometimes the right choice is simply to stand with beings who have shown you what it means to be truly alive. Years passed and the galaxy changed. The Devourers never again faced a defenseless population. Species that had spent millennia running from danger learned to stand and fight. Worlds that had been abandoned were reclaimed and defended. The ancient destroyers found themselves facing not scattered refugees but coordinated resistance from beings who had learned that courage was contagious, and in the place where Kepler 442b had once orbited its star, space itself seemed to remember the day that one Valkyrian anthropologist had chosen to stand with 12 humans against impossible odds. The radiation patterns in the area formed shapes that looked almost like words, as if the universe itself was trying to preserve the message that fear could be overcome, and that standing together was always stronger than running alone. The day Zexhai stood with humans and faced real fear had become the day the galaxy learned to fight back.